The steam hissed and screamed as the locomotive pulled into La Junta, Colorado, on a scorching afternoon in August of 1878, and Grace Sullivan stood frozen in the passenger car, her world nothing but sound and darkness and the nauseating smell of coal smoke that made her stomach turn. Her fingers trembled against the smooth handle of her traveling case, the leather worn from her constant gripping during the 3-day journey from Philadelphia. She could hear boots stomping on the platform outside, voices calling out in that rough Western drawl she had only heard a handful of times before, and somewhere close by a horse whinnied, high and nervous. "Miss, we have arrived at your destination," the conductor said, his voice gentler than it had been when he had first helped her board. She suspected he pitied her, this blind woman traveling alone to marry a stranger, but she had learned to ignore pity years ago. "Thank you," Grace said, lifting her chin. She was 22 years old, had been blind since fever took her sight at age 12, and she refused to let anyone see her fear. Her hand found the seat back, then the wall, and she made her way toward where she knew the door must be. The heat hit her first when she stepped onto the platform, a dry, intense wall of warmth so different from Philadelphia's humid summers. Then came the smells: dust, horses, something cooking that might have been meat, and underneath it all the strange, earthy scent of sagebrush that she did not yet have a name for. The conductor took her elbow, guiding her down the 3 steps to solid ground. "You're intended, Mr. Hutchins. He is supposed to be here to collect you," the conductor said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Grace waited, her heart hammering. She had exchanged 7 letters with Bernard Hutchins over the past 4 months. He owned a dry goods store in La Junta, was 43 years old, had been widowed for 6 years, and needed a wife to help him run his household and business. He had been very clear in his letters that her blindness would not be an impediment, that he needed someone sensible and capable, which her references from the Philadelphia Ladies' Aid Society had assured him she was. She could cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts by touch and memory. She had been assured this would be enough. "I do not see anyone approaching who fits his description," the conductor said after a long moment. Grace's throat tightened. Around her, she could hear the other passengers being greeted, trunks being loaded, the general chaos of a frontier town receiving its weekly train. She stood perfectly still, fighting the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her careful composure. "Perhaps he has been delayed," she managed to say. "I will take you inside to the station house," the conductor said. "You can wait there in the shade." He guided her across the platform, and she counted the steps, trying to orient herself to this new place. 43 steps to the door. The hinges creaked. Inside, the air was marginally cooler, and she could hear the tick of a clock on the wall. "You just wait here, Miss Sullivan," the conductor said. "I am sure he will arrive shortly," but he did not sound sure at all. Grace sat on what felt like a wooden bench, her traveling case beside her, her larger trunk presumably still on the platform. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Time passed slowly. The clock ticked. Outside, the train eventually whistled and pulled away, and the noise of the platform faded to occasional footsteps and distant conversation. "Miss Sullivan," a different voice, younger, uncertain. "Are you Grace Sullivan from Philadelphia?" "Yes," Grace said, standing quickly. "Are you from Mr. Hutchins?" "No, madam." A pause. "I am Wesley Warren. I own the W Ranch about 5 miles outside town. I am afraid I have some difficult news." Grace's hands clenched around her case handle. "What news?" "Bernard Hutchins died 4 days ago." Hart gave out. "He was sitting at his desk in the store and just fell over. Doc said he probably did not suffer." The man's voice was low and careful, like he was gentling a spooked horse. "I am real sorry, madam. I only heard yesterday that you were coming from the minister." Hutchins had told him weeks ago about your arrangement. The minister asked if I would come meet your train and explain the situation. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Grace's feet. Dead. Her intended was dead. She was standing in a town she did not know, in a territory she had never been to, and the one person who was supposed to receive her was dead. "I see," she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. "Thank you for coming to tell me." "What will you do?" Wesley Warren asked. It was the question she had been asking herself since he had spoken. Return to Philadelphia. To what? She had given up her small room at the boarding house, left her position helping at the charity school. She had $87 to her name, which would not be enough to establish herself again back east. She had burned her bridges, as the saying went, for a new life that had evaporated before she could even begin it. "I do not know," she admitted, and hated the way her voice cracked on the last word. "There is a boarding house in town," Wesley said. "Mrs. Potter runs it. She is a good woman. I could take you there, give you time to think and make plans." Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She felt his hand, rough and calloused, gently take her elbow. His other hand took her traveling case. "I have my wagon just outside," he said. 4 steps down, then about 20 paces. He guided her carefully, narrating the obstacles. When they reached the wagon, he helped her up onto the bench seat with the same careful gentleness, then went back for her trunk. She heard him load it, then felt the wagon dip as he climbed up beside her. "I am going to release the brake now," he said. "The movement might be a bit sudden." She appreciated that he told her. So many people did not think to warn her before things happened, assuming that because she could not see, she also could not prepare herself. The wagon lurched forward and she gripped the edge of the seat, feeling the sun beating down on her bonnet, the dry air pulling moisture from her lips. "What is it like here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her spiraling thoughts. Wesley was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she had asked something strange. Then he spoke, and his voice carried a different quality, something thoughtful and careful. "Well, the main street is wide, packed dirt. We are passing the general store now, the new one that was built after the old one burned down 2 years ago. It has a false front painted white, with green trim around the windows. Next to it is the surveyor's office, then the land office. Across the street is the Silver Dollar Saloon, the bank, and the barber shop. Everything is wood, mostly unpainted except for the church, which is white with a little steeple that has a bell." Grace listened, building a map in her mind. She had learned to do this, to construct the world from descriptions and sounds and smells. "What color is the sky?" she asked. Another pause. "Blue. Real blue, like a robin's egg, not a cloud anywhere. The mountains to the west, they look purple this time of day, with the sun starting to get lower. We have got maybe 3 more hours until sunset. And what does sunset look like here?" She felt him shift beside her on the bench, considering. "I suppose it looks like fire," he said slowly. "The whole sky goes orange and red and pink, and the clouds, when we have them, turn every color you can imagine. Sometimes purple like a bruise, sometimes gold like honey. The light hits the prairie grass and makes everything glow. It only lasts maybe 20 minutes, but it is something to see." Grace turned her face toward where she imagined the western horizon must be. She had memories of sunsets from before the fever. But those memories had faded over the years, until she was no longer sure if what she remembered was real or just something she had constructed from imagination and longing. "We are here," Wesley said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Potter's boarding house. It is a 2-story building, painted yellow with white shutters. There is a porch across the front with rocking chairs." He helped her down and she heard a door open, footsteps on wood. "Wesley Warren, what have you got there?" A woman's voice, older, with a hint of Irish lilt beneath the Western roughness. "This is Miss Grace Sullivan, Mrs. Potter. She came out to marry Bernard Hutchins, but nobody told her he had passed. She needs a room while she sorts out her situation." "That poor man. Come here, dear." Softer hands than Wesley's took Grace's arm. "You come right inside. I have a nice room on the first floor so you will not have to manage stairs. Wesley, you bring her trunk around to the side door." Grace was swept inside, into the smell of cooking cabbage and the sound of a ticking clock and women's voices from somewhere deeper in the house. Mrs. Potter kept up a steady stream of talk as she guided Grace down a hallway and into a room. "Here we are. The bed is straight ahead, about 6 paces. There is a washstand to your right, 3 paces, and a wardrobe to your left. Window faces the side garden so it gets morning sun but stays cool in the afternoon. Chamber pot is under the bed. Privy is out back, straight path from the back door, 30 paces exactly. I will walk it with you later so you know the way. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, served in the dining room at the front of the house. Room is $2 a week, includes meals." "Thank you," Grace said. Her throat felt tight again. "Now you just settle in, dear. I will bring you some water and coffee. Wesley is bringing your trunk." The woman bustled out and Grace stood in the center of the room listening. She could hear a clock ticking somewhere, voices from another room muffled, the creak of floorboards as someone walked above. Outside, a dog barked. Slowly, she began to explore the room, counting steps, trailing her fingers along the walls and furniture, building a mental map. The bed was covered with what felt like a simple cotton quilt. The washstand had a basin and pitcher. The wardrobe was empty and smelled of cedar. A knock on the door frame. "Miss Sullivan," Wesley's voice. "I have got your trunk here. Please come in." She heard him enter, the heavy thump of the trunk being set down. "I put it at the foot of the bed," he said. "Is there anything else you need?" Grace turned toward his voice. "You have done more than enough, Mr. Warren. Thank you for meeting the train, for bringing me here. It was the least I could do." A pause. "Look, Miss Sullivan, I know this is not how you plan things, but La Junta is a decent town. There are good people here. Mrs. Potter will take care of you, and the minister, Reverend Thompson, he helps folks who are in difficulty. You are not alone in this." "I appreciate that, Mr. Warren." "Wesley, just Wesley." "Then you must call me Grace." "All right, Grace." She heard him shift, boots scraping on the wood floor. "I have to get back to my ranch, but I will be back in town in a few days. If you need anything, you just tell Mrs. Potter and she will get word to me." After he left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. She had been so brave, so determined, so sure that coming west was the right choice. She had wanted adventure, wanted to prove that her blindness did not limit her, wanted to build a life that was hers. And now she was here, and it had all fallen apart before it even began. Mrs. Potter returned with coffee and water, and then with a plate of stew and bread for supper, which Grace ate in her room. She unpacked her trunk slowly, learning the space, putting her things away in the wardrobe and the washstand drawer. Her fingers found the small bundle of letters from Bernard Hutchins, tied with string. She held them for a long moment, then put them in the bottom of the trunk. A life that would never be. She lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this frontier town. Someone was playing a piano in the saloon, badly. Dogs barked. A man shouted something unintelligible. The wind rattled the window in its frame. She thought about Philadelphia, about her small, familiar room, about the children at the charity school who had held her hands and let her read their lessons in Braille. She thought about her sister, married with 3 children, who had written her letters full of worry about this venture west. She thought about Bernard Hutchins, a man she had never met, now lying in the cemetery outside town. And she thought about Wesley Warren, with his careful voice and his description of the sunset like fire. The next morning, Grace woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She washed from the basin, dressed in a simple gray cotton dress, and made her way to the dining room by following the sounds and smells. Mrs. Potter helped her to a seat and described what was on the table: scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, coffee. There were other boarders who introduced themselves. A mining engineer named Thomas, a widow named Clara who worked at the dress shop, a young couple heading further west as soon as they could afford the wagon they needed. After breakfast, Mrs. Potter walked Grace to the privy and back, then around the boarding house, describing the layout. The town beyond was still a mystery, but at least Grace could navigate her immediate surroundings. "What will you do, dear?" Mrs. Potter asked as they sat on the porch in the rocking chairs. Grace could feel the sun on her face, hear the sounds of the town waking up around them. "I need to find work," Grace said. "I cannot afford to stay anywhere for long without income. Can I read and write? I can sew. I can cook and clean. I am good with figures if someone will read them to me, and I can use an abacus. You can really do all that even without your sight." "Yes," Grace kept her voice firm. She had learned that people needed convincing, needed to see past their assumptions. "Well, Mrs. Potter was quiet for a moment. "The school teacher just left, ran off with a traveling salesman, if you can believe it. They could use someone to help with the children, at least until they find a replacement. And I know the Reverend's wife has been looking for someone to help her with the church accounts. She is a lovely woman but cannot add two numbers together to save her life." Hope flickered in Grace's chest. "Could you introduce me?" By the end of the week, Grace had met with the school board, who were skeptical but desperate, and agreed to let her assist in the one-room schoolhouse with the younger children. She had also met with Mrs. Thompson, the Reverend's wife, a bustling woman with a kind voice who hired her on the spot to help with the church accounts and correspondence. Between the two positions, Grace would make enough to pay for her room and board and have a little left over. It was not the life she had imagined. She was still unmarried, still alone. But she had purpose, and she had begun to learn the geography of La Junta. Mrs. Potter walked with her daily, describing the buildings, the distances, the landmarks. Grace learned to navigate from the boarding house to the church, to the schoolhouse, to the general store. She learned the feel of the wooden sidewalks, the places where they dipped or rose, the sound of her footsteps changing when she passed an alley, and she learned the rhythm of the town. The train whistle at 3 in the afternoon. The bell for Sunday service. The calls of the vegetable seller who came by with his cart on Wednesdays. The distant sound of cattle being driven through town, the shouts of the cowboys, the lowing of the animals. It was on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after she had arrived, that she heard the wagon stop in front of the boarding house and knew, somehow, that it was Wesley Warren. "Evening, Mrs. Potter," his voice carried from the street. "I brought some beef from the ranch like I promised." "You are a good man, Wesley. Come in and have some coffee." Grace was sitting on the porch enjoying the cooling air after a hot day helping at the school. She heard his boots on the steps, then pause. "Hello, Grace," he said. "You are still here." "I am," she said. "I found work. I am teaching the young children and helping Mrs. Thompson with the church accounts." "That is good, real good." He sounded genuinely pleased. "May I sit, please?" The rocking chair beside her creaked as he settled into it. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, just the sound of the rockers on the wood porch and the distant noise of the town. "How are you finding La Junta?" he asked. "It is different from Philadelphia. Drier. Louder in some ways, quieter in others. The people have been kind. What do you miss most? The question surprised her with its directness. She thought about it honestly. Trees, she said finally. Philadelphia has so many trees, big old oaks and maples. You could hear the wind in the leaves, and in fall they would rustle when they fell. Here, everything sounds more open, exposed. We have cottonwoods along the creek, Wesley said. And there are pines up in the mountains, but you are right, it is not like the East. The land here is bigger, wider, takes some getting used to. What is it like where you grew up? Grace asked. You are not from here originally, are you? Your accent is different, Missouri, he said. Little town called Independence. Grew up on a farm, came west after the war. You fought? Yes. His voice changed, became flatter. For the Union, lost my brother at Shiloh. Lost something of myself too, I suppose. When it was over, I did not want to go back to farming corn in Missouri. Wanted something different. Ended up working cattle drives, saved my money, bought land here 5 years ago. You have family still in Missouri, my mother. 2 sisters. They write sometimes. He paused. What about you? What made you decide to come west to marry a stranger? Grace listened to the sound of Mrs. Potter moving around inside, the clink of dishes being washed. How to explain the restlessness that had driven her? The sense that her life in Philadelphia was too small, too limited by everyone's expectations of what a blind woman could or should do. I wanted more, she said simply. I wanted to prove I could have a life that was not just what other people thought I should have. Bernard Hutchins was willing to take a chance on me, to see me as capable. That mattered more than love. You did not want love. I did not think it was possible. The admission came out before she could stop it. I thought practical was better than nothing. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, For what it is worth, I think Bernard Hutchins would have been lucky to have you. And I think you are right to stay here and build something for yourself. Mrs. Potter called from inside that supper was ready, and Wesley stood to leave. But before he went, he said, The sunset tonight should be something special. There are clouds moving in from the west, the kind that catch the light. If you would like, I could describe it to you if you want to sit out here after you eat. Grace's heart did a strange little skip. I would like that. She heard him leave, heard the wagon pull away. Inside, she ate Mrs. Potter's beef stew, but she barely tasted it. After supper, she returned to the porch, to her rocking chair, and waited. The air began to cool. She could feel the change, the way the heat of the day slowly released its grip. Birds called out, settling for the evening. Somewhere a child laughed. And then she heard the wagon again, the familiar sound of it stopping and Wesley's boots on the steps. I hope you do not mind, he said. I told Mrs. Potter I would be back to sit a spell. I do not mind. He settled into the chair beside her, and they sat quietly for a few minutes. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful. The sun is getting close to the mountains now. It is still bright yellow, but starting to go orange around the edges. The clouds I mentioned, they are stretched out across the sky like someone pulled cotton apart. They are white right now, but that will change. The light is different than it was earlier, softer somehow, like everything is wrapped in gold. Grace turned her face west, toward his voice, toward where she imagined the sun must be. The mountains are dark against the sky, Wesley continued. Like a line of shadows. But the peaks, they are catching the light, going purple and pink. Now the sun is touching the mountains and everything is changing fast. The clouds are going orange. No more than orange, like copper, like a new penny. And there are streaks of pink starting, way up high. The whole sky is layered, yellow and orange and pink, and still some blue up above. His voice had changed, become almost reverent. Grace found herself holding her breath, seeing it in her mind, painting the picture from his words. The sun is half gone now behind the mountains. The orange is deepening, going red. The clouds are on fire, every shade of red and orange you can imagine. There is purple creeping in at the edges, and the pink is spreading. The prairie grass, it is glowing gold in the light. Everything looks like it is burning, but gentle, like coals in a fireplace. Grace could feel it, the beauty he was describing. She could almost see it, not with her eyes but with something deeper, something that responded to the poetry in his voice. "Now the sun is gone," Wesley said softly. "But the light remains. The sky is purple and pink and orange, and it is fading even as I watch. The stars are starting to come out in the east. The mountains are just dark shapes now, and everything is going soft and quiet, like the world is settling down to sleep." They sat in silence as the last light faded. Grace felt something unfurl in her chest, something she had not felt in a long time. Joy, perhaps, or wonder, or maybe just the simple pleasure of sharing a beautiful moment with someone who cared enough to give it to her in words. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It was my pleasure," Wesley said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He came back 3 days later and again described the sunset. This time there were no clouds, just the pure progression from blue to yellow to orange to red, the mountains going from brown to purple to black. He came back the following week, and the week after that. It became a pattern, something Grace looked forward to with an intensity that surprised her. Between his visits, she taught the children at the school, helped Mrs. Thompson with her accounts, and learned to navigate more of the town. She made friends with Clara, the widow who worked at the dress shop, who would walk with her sometimes and describe the people passing by, the new buildings going up, the changes in the town. She learned to recognize people by their footsteps, their voices, the way they moved through space. And slowly, carefully, she began to build a life in La Junta. But it was Wesley's visits she treasured most. He would arrive in the late afternoon, sometimes with supplies for Mrs. Potter, sometimes with nothing but himself. They would sit on the porch, and he would describe the sunset, and then they would talk. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle and the horses, about the men who worked for him and their various misadventures. She told him about the children at school, about Mrs. Thompson's inability to spell even the simplest words, about the small triumphs and frustrations of her days. "There is a little girl in my class, Sarah, who reminds me of myself," Grace said one evening in late September as they waited for the sunset. "She is so determined to prove she can do everything the other children can do, even though she has a twisted foot that makes it hard for her to run. She will not let anyone help her unless she absolutely has to." "Sounds familiar," Wesley said, and she could hear the gentle teasing in his voice. "I suppose it does," Grace smiled. "But I am trying to teach her that accepting help is not the same as admitting weakness, that sometimes letting people help you is a gift you give them, not a burden you impose." "Have you learned that lesson yourself?" Grace considered. "I am working on it." Wesley laughed, a warm sound that made something flutter in Grace's stomach. When had she started to feel this way about him? When had his visits become the center around which her weeks revolved? "The sun is starting to set," Wesley said, and his voice shifted into that careful, descriptive tone she loved. "There is a line of clouds on the horizon, thin as lace. The sun is hitting them from below, and they are glowing like they are lit from within. The sky above is still blue, but it is deepening, going toward purple. The sun itself is huge and orange, sitting right on the edge of the world." Grace listened, picturing it. "Now it is slipping down, and the clouds are going from white to gold to orange. The light is spreading across the whole western sky. There are streaks of pink starting, thin lines like someone painted them with a fine brush. The prairie is gold and the mountains are going purple. Everything is so clear, like the air has been washed clean." His voice wrapped around her, and Grace felt herself falling into the images he created. But more than that, she felt herself falling into him, into the kindness and patience and care that he showed her, week after week. "The sun is half gone," Wesley continued. "The orange is deepening to red. The pink is spreading, and there is purple creeping in at the edges. The whole sky looks like a painting, like something too beautiful to be real. The clouds are layers of color, orange and pink and red and purple, all shifting and changing." Grace realized her hands were gripping the arms of the rocking chair, her whole body leaning forward as if she could reach out and touch the sunset he described. "Now it is almost gone," Wesley said softly. "Just a sliver of red on the horizon. The clouds are fading from orange to pink to purple. The stars are coming out, and the last of the light is slipping away, leaving everything soft and peaceful." In the quiet that followed, Grace heard herself say, "I wish I could see it the way you do." "You do see it," Wesley said, and his voice was close, closer than usual. "Maybe not with your eyes, but you see it. I can tell by the way you listen, the way your face changes when I describe it. You see it in your own way." Grace turned toward him, toward his voice. "Wesley, why do you keep coming back? Week after week, taking time away from your ranch just to sit with me and describe sunsets." The silence stretched out, and she wished desperately that she could see his face, read his expression. "Because I want to," he said finally. "Because these evenings with you have become the best part of my week. Because watching the sunset alone was never as good as sharing it with you." He paused, and she heard him take a breath. "Because I am falling in love with you, Grace Sullivan, and I do not know how to stop even if I wanted to." Grace's heart stopped, then started again, beating hard against her ribs. "You love me?" "Yes." Simple, direct, honest. "I have been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon, that you came here to marry another man, that you deserve better than a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and a past full of war and death. But I cannot help it. I love the way you laugh when the children say something funny. I love how stubborn you are about doing things yourself. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you listen like every word matters. I love you, and I am sorry if that is not what you want to hear." Grace found she was crying, tears sliding down her cheeks in the darkness. "It is exactly what I want to hear," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself, because I thought it was impossible. I thought you were just being kind, that you pitied me." "Pity?" Wesley's voice was fierce. "Grace, you are the strongest, most capable person I have ever met. You came to a strange place and built a life from nothing. You teach children and keep accounts and navigate a town you cannot see. You are extraordinary. There is no pity in what I feel for you, only admiration and respect and love." She heard him move, felt him kneel beside her chair. His hand found hers, rough and warm and gentle. "I know I am not what you planned," he said. "I am not a store owner with a comfortable life in town. I am a rancher, and it is hard work, and the house is small, and some years we barely scrape by. But I promise you, if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life describing sunsets to you and loving you with everything I have." Grace reached out with her free hand, found his face, traced the rough stubble on his jaw, the shape of his cheekbone, his lips. He held perfectly still, letting her learn him by touch. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. I will marry you and live on your ranch and learn to love the wide open spaces. And you will keep describing sunsets to me, and I will keep loving you more with every one." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. And then his arms were around her, and she was holding him. This man who had given her back the beauty of the world through his words, who had seen past her blindness to the woman underneath. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in the little white church with the bell in the steeple. Clara stood up with Grace, and Wesley's foreman, a gruff man named Pete, stood up with him. Mrs. Potter cried through the whole thing, and half the town turned out because Wesley was well liked and Grace's story had captured hearts. The ranch was 5 miles outside town, and Wesley had prepared her as they drove out in the wagon. "The house is small," he said. 2 rooms downstairs, a bedroom and a main room with the kitchen. There is a loft above for storage or someday for children. It is built of logs with chinking, and there is a porch across the front facing south. The barn is about 50 paces from the house, and the bunkhouse for the men is beyond that. There is a creek about 100 paces west, with cottonwood trees along it like I told you about. When they arrived, he helped her down and let her explore, guiding her through the house, describing everything, letting her learn it by touch. The main room had a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the window, a cast iron stove for cooking. The bedroom had a double bed with a quilt his mother had sent from Missouri, a wardrobe, a washstand. "It is not much," Wesley said, and she could hear the anxiety in his voice. "It is perfect," Grace said, and meant it. "It is ours." That first night they lay together in the bed, and Wesley described what he could see from the window. "The moon is nearly full," he said. "It is painting everything silver. I can see the barn, dark against the moonlight. I can see the cottonwoods along the creek and the prairie stretching out beyond. The stars are so bright, thousands of them. The whole sky is full of light." Grace nestled against his side, her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady. "I do not need to see it," she said. "I have everything I need right here." The days took on a new rhythm. Wesley would rise before dawn and go out to work the ranch. Grace would wake to the sound of him moving quietly, trying not to disturb her, and she would smile in the darkness. She learned the geography of the house and the immediate yard, learned to navigate from the house to the porch to the clothesline to the chicken coop. Wesley had made sure there were no obstacles in her paths, had told the men to be careful about leaving tools or equipment where she might trip. She cooked and cleaned and did the mending. She kept the accounts for the ranch, using the abacus she had brought from Philadelphia and her careful memory. Wesley would read her the figures from the sales and purchases, and she would track everything, telling him what they could afford, where they needed to cut back, when they had a little extra. And every evening when the work was done, they would sit on the porch together and Wesley would describe the sunset. Each one was different. Some were quiet and simple, just the sun slipping below the horizon with minimal color. Others were spectacular, with clouds and colors that Wesley struggled to find words for. Grace loved them all, loved the ritual of it, the way it connected them. "I used to take sunsets for granted," Wesley told her one evening in November, as they sat wrapped in blankets against the growing chill. "Before you, I would see them, but I did not really look. Now I see every detail because I want to give them to you. You have given me so much more than sunsets," Grace said. "You have given me a home and a purpose and a love I never thought I would have." Winter came, and with it snow that Wesley described as transforming the brown prairie into a wonderland of white. The work was harder in winter, the cattle needing extra care, the cold biting and brutal. But inside, the house was warm, and Grace learned to love the sound of the fire crackling, the smell of stew cooking, the feel of Wesley's cold hands as he came in from outside and she warmed them in hers. They talked for hours, learning each other's stories. Wesley told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done, the nightmares that still came sometimes. Grace told him about losing her sight, about the fever that had raged for days, about waking up in darkness and thinking at first it was night, then slowly realizing the darkness would never end. "I was so angry," she said. For months, maybe years. I raged against God and fate and the unfairness of it. And then slowly, I realized that anger was not going to give me my sight back. I had to decide if I was going to let blindness define me, limit me, or if I was going to find a way to live fully despite it. You chose to live, Wesley said. I chose to live, Grace agreed. But I will not lie and say it has always been easy. There are days when I am so frustrated I could scream. Days when I want to see your face so badly it hurts. Days when I feel like I am missing so much of the world. What can I do on those days? What you already do, Grace said. Be patient. Describe things. Remind me that there are different ways of seeing. Spring came, and with it the birth of calves and the beginning of the busy season. The ranch was doing well. Wesley's careful management and Grace's meticulous accounting meant they were building something solid, something that would last. In April, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Wesley one evening as they sat on the porch watching, or rather as he watched and described the sunset. The sun is just touching the horizon, he was saying, and the whole sky is going pink like the inside of a shell. There are no clouds today, so it is just this pure wash of color, pink fading to purple fading to blue. Wesley, Grace interrupted, I have something to tell you. He stopped, and she could hear the shift in his attention. What is it? I am going to have a baby. The silence stretched out for 3 heartbeats, and then Wesley let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the bunkhouse. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and telling him to put her down before he made her dizzy. A baby, he said, his voice full of wonder. Grace, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy? She asked, even though she could hear that he was. Happy does not begin to cover it, Wesley said. I am terrified and thrilled and so full of love I think I might burst. When? Late October, I think. Maybe early November. He pulled her close, and they stood there on the porch as the sun finished setting and the stars came out, holding each other and imagining the future. Grace went to see the doctor in La Junta, who examined her and pronounced her healthy. Mrs. Potter fussed over her and Clara helped her make tiny clothes. The women of the town, who had watched Grace's story unfold, rallied around her with advice and gifts and offers of help. The summer was hot, and Grace grew large and uncomfortable. Wesley fretted over her, worrying about every little thing until she had to firmly tell him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time and she was perfectly capable. I know, he said, but you are my wife, and that is my child, and I cannot help worrying. Worry less, describe more, Grace said. Tell me what I look like. Wesley laughed. You look beautiful. Your face is fuller, glowing like everyone says pregnant women do. Your belly is round and perfect. You move more slowly, more carefully, and I can see you put your hand on your back sometimes when it aches. Your dresses barely fit anymore, and you are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. In late October, on a cool evening with the first frost threatening, Grace's pains began. Wesley rode hard to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Potter, then paced the porch while the women took over the bedroom. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next morning. And then, as the sun rose on an October morning, filling the bedroom with light that Wesley described to her between contractions, their son was born. He is perfect, Wesley said, his voice choked with tears as he placed the baby in Grace's arms. He has dark hair like you and he is screaming his head off, so I think his lungs work fine. 10 fingers, 10 toes, everything where it should be. Grace held her son, feeling his weight, his warmth, his tiny fists waving. She could not see him, but she learned him by touch, tracing every feature, every perfect inch of him. What should we name him? Wesley asked. They had discussed this, had gone through dozens of names, But now, holding him, feeling him, Grace knew. "William," she said. "After your brother who died at Shiloh, William Warren." Wesley made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "William," he said, "that is perfect. That is exactly right. The first months with William were exhausting and wonderful. Grace learned to care for him by touch and sound, learned to distinguish between his different cries, learned to navigate the house while holding him. Wesley would describe him to her as he grew and changed. "He smiled today, a real smile," Wesley said one evening in December as they sat by the fire. William was asleep in the cradle Wesley had made. He was lying on the bed and you were talking to him, and he just smiled like you had said the funniest thing in the world. What does he look like now?" Grace asked. She asked this often, needing to update the picture in her mind. "He has your dark hair and it is getting thicker. His eyes are blue, but I think they might change. He is getting chubby with rolls on his thighs and wrists. When he is awake, he is always moving, kicking his legs and waving his arms like he is trying to fly. And when he looks at you, when he hears your voice, his whole face lights up." Grace felt the familiar tightness in her throat. "I wish I could see that." "I know," Wesley said gently. "But you feel it, do you not? The way he calms when you hold him, the way he turns toward your voice. He knows you love him. That matters more than seeing." As William grew, Grace learned to care for a mobile baby than a toddler. The house had to be made safe, with guards around the fireplace and the stove, with dangerous items kept out of reach. Wesley and the men kept the yard clear, making sure William could toddle around safely while Grace listened, tracking him by the sound of his footsteps and his babbling. And every evening, Wesley described the sunset, and now he described it to William too, holding their son and pointing to the colors, teaching him the words. "Look, William, see how the sky is orange, like a pumpkin, and there that pink like the roses Mama likes." When William was 2, Grace realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. In the spring of 1882, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with a powerful cry. "She has red hair," Wesley said, wonder in his voice. "Bright red like a new penny. I have no idea where that came from. And she is so small, but fierce. You should see the way she is glaring at me, like she is offended to be here." They named her Emma, after Grace's mother, and she grew into a spirited, determined child who kept them all on their toes. William was a gentle older brother, patient with his baby sister's demands for attention. The ranch continued to prosper. Wesley bought more land, increased the herd. They hired more men, and Grace kept track of it all with her abacus and her careful memory. The little house was too small now, and Wesley built an addition, 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. "Describe it to me," Grace said as the work was being done. "The new rooms are on the north side," Wesley said, "built with the same logs so it matches. The bedrooms are the same size, big enough for a bed and a wardrobe each. The dining room has windows on 2 sides, so it gets good light. We are putting in a bigger table, big enough for all of us and guests too." Grace ran her hands over the new walls, the smooth wood, learning the expanded space. It felt like a home, like something permanent and solid. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and sunsets. William started school in town, and Grace felt the bittersweet ache of watching her child grow toward independence. Emma followed 2 years later, and the house seemed quiet during the school days. Grace continued to help Mrs. Thompson with the church accounts, driving into town once a week with Wesley or one of the men. She maintained friendships with Clara and Mrs. Potter and the other women of La Junta. She was part of the community, known and respected, but the heart of her life was the ranch, her family, and the evenings on the porch with Wesley. "Some things do not change," Wesley said one evening in the summer of 1885. William was 7, Emma was 5, and they were sitting on the porch together as a family, waiting for the sunset. The sky is still blue, the sun is still heading west, and I am still the luckiest man alive. "Tell us about the sunset, Papa," Emma demanded. She loved the ritual as much as Grace did. "All right, little one. Let me see. The sun is getting close to the mountains, and it is going from yellow to orange. There are clouds today, big fluffy ones, and they are starting to catch the light. The highest ones are going pink already." "Like Mama's dress," William said. "Exactly like Mama's dress," Wesley agreed. "And the mountains are going from brown to purple. The grass is golden in the light. Now the sun is touching the mountains and everything is changing fast. The orange is getting deeper, going red. The clouds are every color, orange and pink and purple and gold." Grace listened, her hand in Wesley's, her children beside her, and felt the deep contentment of a life fully lived. She thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the train 7 years ago, blind and alone and facing a future that had disintegrated before it began. She could not have imagined this life then, could not have pictured the love and joy and purpose she would find. "The sun is half gone now," Wesley continued, "and the whole western sky is on fire. Red and orange and purple all layered together. The light is hitting the creek, making it look like molten gold. The cottonwoods are dark shapes against all that color. It is one of the most beautiful sunsets I have ever seen." "Better than yesterday?" Emma asked. "Different than yesterday," Wesley said. "Every sunset is unique, special in its own way. Like every day with your mother and you children is special." Grace smiled, leaning her head against Wesley's shoulder. Around them, the prairie was settling into evening, the sounds changing from day to night. Crickets were beginning their chorus. A nightbird called. The cattle were lowing in the distance. "The sun is gone now," Wesley said softly. "But the color remains, purple and pink fading into the deep blue of evening. The stars are coming out, and the world is peaceful and good." Later, after the children were in bed, Grace and Wesley sat alone on the porch. The night was warm, and the stars were bright overhead, invisible to Grace but present in Wesley's descriptions and in the vast feeling of the sky above. "You ever regret it?" Wesley asked. "Coming here, staying when Hutchins died, marrying me instead of having a comfortable life in town?" Grace considered the question seriously. "No," she said. "Not for a moment. This life, this family, this love we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me so much more than descriptions of sunsets, Wesley. You gave me a life." "You gave me one too," Wesley said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions. Working the ranch, surviving. You taught me to see the beauty in things, to appreciate what I had. You taught me what love really is." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, listening to the night. Over the next years, their family continued to grow and change. William showed a talent for working with horses and spent hours with Wesley learning the ranch work. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. In 1887, Grace gave birth to another son whom they named Thomas, and in 1890 a second daughter, Alice. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. The ranch prospered. Wesley's careful stewardship and Grace's meticulous financial management meant they weathered the hard years and thrived in the good ones. Grace's role in the community expanded too. She started a program at the church to teach other blind people how to navigate and care for themselves. She worked with the school to make sure children with disabilities were not overlooked or dismissed. She became a voice for those who were often ignored, and the town listened because they had seen what she could do. And through it all, Wesley described the sunsets. "I think I have described 1,000 sunsets to you now," he said one evening in the fall of 1893. "Maybe more, and I am still not tired of it. Tell me what makes tonight special," Grace said. Their 4 children were scattered around the porch, the older ones reading, the younger ones playing quietly. "Tonight, the air is so clear it is like looking through glass," Wesley said. "The mountains are sharp against the sky, every ridge and peak distinct. The sun is huge and orange, sitting right on the highest peak. There is one cloud, just one, thin and delicate, and it is catching the light like a ribbon of fire. The sky is layering from yellow to orange to pink to purple to deep blue. And the prairie grass is that golden color it gets in fall, like waves of wheat." William looked up from his book. "Papa, do you think I will ever be able to describe things as well as you do?" Wesley smiled. "You already do, son. I have heard you describing things to your mother when I am not here. You have the gift for it." It was true. William had inherited his father's eye for detail and his way with words. Emma, too, had learned to describe things, though her style was more direct, less poetic. Even young Thomas and Alice were learning, telling their mother about the things they saw in their own childish way. "I am surrounded by people who help me see the world," Grace said. "I am the luckiest woman alive." The turn of the century came, bringing with it changes. La Junta grew, the railroad expanded, new businesses opened. The wild frontier feeling of the town faded, replaced by something more settled and civilized. Grace watched her children grow into young adults, watched William take on more responsibility at the ranch, watched Emma develop a passion for teaching and take a position at the school where Grace had once worked. In 1902, William married a young woman named Sarah, the same Sarah who had been in Grace's class all those years ago, the girl with the twisted foot who had learned to accept help as a gift. They built a house on the ranch land, and the next year, Grace became a grandmother. "He looks like William did as a baby," Wesley told her, placing his grandson in her arms. "Same dark hair, same serious expression. His name is James, and he is perfect." Grace held her grandson and felt the circle of life completing itself. She was 46 years old, had been married to Wesley for 24 years, and the life they had built together was rich beyond measure. Emma married in 1904 to a young lawyer who had moved to La Junta from Denver. Thomas showed an interest in studying agriculture at the new college in Fort Collins. Alice, the youngest, was still finding her way, bright and artistic and full of dreams. And through all the changes, the one constant was the sunset ritual. Every evening, unless weather or circumstance absolutely prevented it, Grace and Wesley sat on the porch and he described the day's end to her. "I have been thinking," Wesley said one evening in the summer of 1905. They were alone, the children grown and gone or busy with their own pursuits. "About how much our lives have changed since that day I met you at the train station." "Tell me," Grace said. "You were so brave," Wesley said. "Standing there in the station alone, learning that the man you had come to marry was dead. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met, and then I got to know you and I realized it was not just bravery. It was determination and strength and grace, actual grace, not just your name." "I was terrified," Grace admitted. "I felt like my world had ended." But it had not ended. It was just beginning. Wesley took her hand. "These years with you, raising our children, building this life together, they have been the best years of my life. Every single day I wake up grateful that Hutchins died." "Wesley," Grace laughed, scandalized. "I know it sounds terrible," Wesley said, "but it is true. If he had lived, you would have married him and I would never have known you. You would never have been mine. So yes, I am grateful for the twist of fate that brought you to me." Grace lifted his hand to her lips, kissed his rough knuckles. "I am grateful too," she said, "for all of it. For the journey that brought me here, for the courage to stay, for the love we found together." "The sunset is starting," Wesley said, and his voice took on that familiar, descriptive tone. "The sky is clear, not a cloud in sight. The sun is huge and orange, dropping toward the mountains. The light is that special golden color it gets in summer, warm and rich. Everything looks like it is glowing." Grace settled into her chair, her hand still in Wesley's, and listened to him paint the picture of the evening. The sun is touching the mountains now, and the orange is deepening to red. The sky is layering up, orange at the horizon, then yellow, then pink, then purple, then the deep blue of coming night. The stars are already visible in the east. The prairie is gold and purple in the fading light. It is breathtaking. He paused, and Grace heard him take a breath. "You know, I have described thousands of sunsets to you over the years. And the thing I realize is that I am not just describing the sky. I am describing my love for you. Every color, every shade, every moment of beauty is another way of saying I love you. The sunsets are just the language I use to tell you what is in my heart." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. After all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you too," she said, "more than I have words to express. You have been my eyes, yes, but more than that, you have been my partner, my love, my home. You made me believe in beauty again, in love, in the possibility of joy. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined." They sat together as the sun finished setting and the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted through decades and would last until the end of their days. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost Mrs. Potter in 1907, and Grace mourned the woman who had given her shelter and kindness when she needed it most. They lost Pete, Wesley's foreman, in 1909, and Wesley grieved his old friend. But there were joys too. More grandchildren. Thomas graduating from college and returning to help run the ranch with new ideas and methods. Alice marrying a musician and moving to Denver but visiting often. In 1912, Grace and Wesley celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting half the town. There were speeches and toasts and a cake that Emma had made. And at the end of the evening, Grace and Wesley sat on their porch, just the two of them, and watched the sunset. 30 years, Wesley said. "How did we get so lucky? We chose each other," Grace said. "Every day we keep choosing each other." "Tell me what you see," Grace said, as she had said thousands of times before. Wesley smiled and began to describe the sunset, his voice as careful and loving as it had been the very first time. "The sun is setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The clouds are catching the light, glowing like embers. The prairie is golden in the fading light. And beside me is the woman I love, the woman who made my life complete, the woman who taught me what it means to truly see." Grace leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the train 30 years ago, blind and alone. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. "The best decision I ever made was staying," she said. "The best decision I ever made was you. The best decision I ever made was describing that first sunset," Wesley said. "Because it led to this, to us, to forever." They sat together as the darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a life together that was richer and fuller than either had dreamed possible. The Wild West was changing around them, becoming more civilized, more settled. But here on their porch, with the sunset fading and the night coming on, some things remained constant, Love remained. Commitment remained. The daily choice to see beauty and to share it remained. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie settled into night, Grace Sullivan Warren knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The sunset ritual continued for many more years. Wesley's hair turned white, and he moved more slowly, but his eye for beauty never dimmed and his ability to describe it never faltered. Grace's face lined with age, but her smile remained bright and her spirit remained strong. In the spring of 1920, Wesley fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from town, did what he could, but they all knew it was serious. Wesley was 71 years old and his body was worn from a lifetime of hard work. Grace sat beside his bed holding his hand, and for once it was Wesley who could not see. His eyes were closed, his breathing labored. "Tell me about the sunset," he whispered one evening as the light began to fade outside the window. Grace's throat tightened, but she looked toward the window, toward where she knew the sun must be setting, and she drew on every sunset Wesley had ever described to her. "The sun is touching the mountains," she said softly, "and the sky is going orange and pink. The clouds are catching the light, glowing like embers in a fire. The prairie is golden and the cottonwoods along the creek are dark shapes against all that color. It is beautiful, my love, so beautiful." Wesley smiled, his eyes still closed. "You see it," he whispered. "You always could see it." "You taught me how," Grace said, her tears falling freely now. "You taught me to see beauty in everything." "I love you," Wesley said. "Every sunset, every moment, every breath, I love you." "I love you too," Grace said, "always and forever." He died as the last light faded from the sky, his hand in hers, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Grace held him and felt the moment his spirit left, felt the terrible absence where his presence had been. But even in her grief, she knew that what they had built together could not be destroyed by death. Their love was written in the land they had worked, in the children they had raised, in the thousands of sunsets he had described, and she had seen through his words. The family gathered for the funeral, held in the little white church where Grace and Wesley had married 42 years earlier. The whole town came because Wesley Warren had been respected and loved. They buried him in the cemetery on the hill, and Grace stood by the grave with her children around her, listening to the wind in the grass and remembering. In the days after, Grace moved through her grief with the same determination that had carried her through every other challenge in her life. She was 64 years old, and she had been blessed with a love that most people never found. She would not dishonor that love by giving up now. William and his family moved into the main house with her, running the ranch as Wesley had taught him. Emma visited often, bringing her children. Thomas and Alice wrote letters and came when they could. The house remained full of life and love, and every evening Grace went out to the porch and sat in her rocking chair. Sometimes William would sit with her and describe the sunset, using his father's words and his own. Sometimes she sat alone, remembering all the sunsets Wesley had painted for her with his voice, feeling his presence in the changing light even though she could not see it. Grace lived for another 15 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79 in the summer of 1935. Her children gathered around her bed the night before she died, and she told them about the journey that had brought her west, about the love she had found, about the life that had exceeded her wildest dreams. "Do not mourn for me," she told them. "I have lived a full and beautiful life. I have known love and purpose and joy. And soon I will see your father again, and perhaps this time I will see him with my eyes as well as my heart." They buried her beside Wesley on the hill, and the whole town came to say goodbye to the blind woman who had taught them all about courage and determination, and Grace. Years later, Grace's great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and watch the sunsets over the mountains, and they would tell the story of the mail-order bride who stepped off the train blind, and the cowboy who described every sunset until she loved him. They would tell how that love had built a family and a legacy that lasted for generations. And they would remember that the most beautiful things in life are not always seen with the eyes, but with the heart. The prairie grass would still turn golden in the evening light. The mountains would still go purple at sunset. The sky would still paint itself in shades of orange and pink and red. And the love that Grace and Wesley had built together would continue to live on, in the land they had worked, in the family they had raised, in the story that would be told for generations to come. A story of courage and love, of sunsets described and beauty shared, of two people who found each other against all odds and built a life that was extraordinary in its simple, profound devotion. The end of their story was not really an end at all, but a beginning that continued long after they were gone, in the hearts of those who remembered them and in the legacy of love they left behind.